Um, okay, so and that was for 10 years, was it? You worked there?
No, well, no, I was just a few years at the school system, but I had worked at the Office of Management and Budget overseeing the budget for the school
Right,
system. So I was familiar, but as a director of operations, just a few years.
right. And how was that like rather than the budgeting process?
Well, it was good that I knew about budgeting,
Mm,
from OMB. I understood the budget very well. But like I said, I had a much broader scope of responsibility. I was responsible for overseeing personnel and operate the all of the operations, information technology,
yeah,
and um, the school system is not was not up to date. So not only with the infrastructure, but also with the IT systems were antiquated, and you know data was a real issue.
yeah,
But data seems to be an issue in everything. In asset management, one of the main issues we found when I was at GAO was data, poor
yeah,
data. So
yeah.
data seems to always be an issue.
I was going to say, did you manage to pull together a list of all the schools in your area?
Oh yes, we did
Yeah,
have. Oh yes, we always
yeah.
knew that was not an issue. We did know the schools, and we did know the enrollment of the schools, and
Okay.
we did have that just basic information.
Hmm. Yeah. State government used to struggle with that big time. But yeah, so okay. From that point of view, so when from there you went to GAO.
Did you know?
Right.
The
Okay.
the audit office, yeah.
Yeah. And so, what was it like? Because you've really gone from planning, so you got a lot of experience there, into the school system where you were asking for money, if you like, if you wanted to be subtle, you're asking for money. And then you went into the GAO where you were in the audit area.
Well, yes. Well, the I think it's similar to your audit office. A
Yeah.
GAO, it's interesting. GAO modernized itself. It used to be called the General Accounting Office,
Yeah.
and people thought that it was just a bunch of accountants, doing audits. But I think similar to your audit office, GAO does both financial as well as performance reviews.
Right. Okay.
Um, so in the early 2000s, the head of the agency renamed GAO to the Government Accountability Office
Mm.
because we wanted to make the point that it's accountability not only for fiscal accountability but also for performance and program accountability. So
Yeah.
I think that was a really good change because people came to understand the work much better. So I'm not an accountant or an engineer, but my background, as I said, is in public policy, and I really liked moving to GAO because having the budget experience and the hands-on
Yeah.
experience as a director. GAO does reviews of across the federal government.
Yeah.
So I had the chance to work on reviewing the performance of many different federal agencies. And that was really very interesting. I really enjoyed that a lot. Their standards we had to follow government auditing standards. It's called GAGAS, generally accepted government auditing standards,
Yeah.
and use those standards to review what agencies were doing. And we used many different sources of criteria. And it was just very interesting. I had the opportunity to work in a lot of different areas. But the area I liked best was the physical infrastructure, where I worked for the last 10 years in physical infrastructure and asset management.
Did that go
But like
through
I said,
any?
I think
So,
it's all asset management. I really think all of it is
yeah,
asset
it
management.
is. At the end of the day, we like to wrap it up in that cocoon and say asset management, because we used to get that because asset management was initiated in Australia through. It was originally ED, E- going back a bit, ED 50, I think it was, which was the draft for accounting for assets.
Ah,
So we used to always, and they then initiated that framework for local government in particular, also the authorities, but there was a big emphasis on local government because they had very little records of their roads and everything else.
mhm.
And so basically, they then gave them the government gave them a timeline which they had to um, account for their assets, all the infrastructure, roads, buildings, whatever, drainage, and so on. So that was a big impetus for moving forward and getting into asset management. The downside of that is people used to say, and even I had it said to me about 10 years ago, but asset management is only asset accounting, isn't it? You think, oh, jeez. Come into
Yeah.
my parlor, come in and I'll tell you all about it. But you do get those sort of comments. I think,
Mhm.
it's crazy. But okay. So bringing this framework now into being, um, what happened from there? What was the implementation like framework?
Well, it
How
was
did people feel
interesting.
about it?
Yeah, it was interesting because we made a recommendation, just one recommendation in that report that I mentioned, GAO 1957. And the recommendation was to the Office of Management and Budget, which is responsible for, as I mentioned earlier, guidance and policies for capital planning and budgeting. And so we made one recommendation that OMB should incorporate information on leading practices along the lines of the ISO 55000.
Yep.
Um, that OMB should incorporate that into its guidance to help federal agencies with asset management. Now, OMB did not comment on our recommendation and did not take any action, but it's very interesting because there are things they could have done which they did not do. They could have updated their guidance. There's a circular on capital planning. There's several things they could have done, or they could have just put out a memo on leading practices, but they did not. But many federal agencies did take action. And that was very interesting because they were not required to. But when this report became more well known, when we presented it, to different agencies, and the agencies that we studied in the report, there are some case studies. Many federal agencies did start to develop more of an asset management plan and think about it more strategically. So that's what I was saying earlier, that it really is, I think, in the federal government for the United States, it's at the individual agency level that you will see changes, um, not as a requirement, uh, overall requirement. But that was really great. We saw agencies doing things, planning more carefully, thinking more about their whole portfolio instead of looking at individual assets, uh, thinking about portfolio management.
Yep.
So that was great.
And what about the other side of things, community input? I'll call it that. Going out to the community and asking them what they think.
Well,
In the,
that is a really good point because in our work in Canada, we saw that the Canada is really good, and I'm probably
I know
Australia,
it's very good.
very good at getting community involvement.
Yeah.
The federal government is not so good at that. That's not really the way federal agencies operate in general. Um, so we did not see that, um, but Canada's a great example, and I don't know. You may have examples from Australia also.
We're just in local government. We're in Victoria. I can only talk about. I don't know what's happening in the other states at the moment. But in Victoria, there is a great effort to involve the community in local government, and basically, a lot of them have. Well, some of them, I should say, not a lot of them. Some of them I know of have embarked on 2-year programs to bring the community in and get them involved and have their input and everything else. So the council then knows what direction they should take. So rather than council coming up and saying, we want to go this way, people are saying, we want you to go that way. You know.
Mhm.
So they're actually taking all that on board now. And it is doing some very good things. The findings, they're getting surprised by some of the findings. Let's say that.
Oh,
Uh,
that's
so it's been a very positive thing.
that's good.
Um, yeah, the water authorities and the power and whatnot have had community involvement for a good 5 years now in the budgets.
Oh, that's great.
So they get involved in that part of the process as well. So, the authorities go out, find out what they, the people want in an overview sort of thing, let them know where they're at in terms of the quality of the water and all this sort of stuff, and then come back and produce programs which then their 5-year budgets, and the community gets involved in that process as well. So
That's
it's
great.
all, yeah, it's all community, community, community. Very happy communities. That's what you create,
Hmm.
you know, because they are very knowledgeable. I mean, if you went back 30 years, people would ask in the form of a complaint, how come this, how come that, but not very educational, not very succinct questions, right? Very localized, very my problem. Now they are very educated in their questions. They can ask you questions that will, if you're not careful, get yourself in a lot of trouble because you don't know the answer to. So they're now happily involved. And dare I say it, the engineers are not doing the questions or being involved. I suppose that they will be involved in it, but they're not running it. The people that should be running those sort of things are running it, which is great because
Oh, good.
it helps
Yeah.
feeds the asset management plans as well. So from observation, it makes for a very happy community base. And to some extent, very happy directorship because they know now what people really want. In the old days, and when I say the old days, 30 years ago, we had national training in New Zealand. And one of the engineers stood up and said, I'm paid to know what the people want. Walked out. Bye-bye. If that's what you believe, it's just crazy. I'm paid to know. No, you haven't got a clue what they want. Talk to them. Yeah. Crazy stuff. But anyway, it's all evolved since then, and things are moving forward. And that's what I like about things at the moment. Enjoyed this video? Press the like button and subscribe. If you'd like to see more, please click on the Patreon link below and sign up.